You call in sick, maybe you lose pay, maybe you have to prove it with a doctor's note. Maybe you just feel guilty for asking. 3,200 years ago, a stonecutter in Egypt did the same thing and the outcome was almost the opposite of yours. His name would have been recorded on a piece of limestone in black ink next to the word sick. His pay continued. A doctor was sent to see him. Nobody questioned whether he deserved it and nobody docked his rations for the days he was gone. That sounds like a workplace policy from a Scandinavian design firm. It's actually the personnel record of a village called Deir el-Medina, built around 1550 BCE on the west bank of the Nile, directly across the river from modern Luxor. And the more you look at how that village ran itself, the stranger the comparison gets. Deir el-Medina wasn't a farming town. It had no fields, no independent economy, no market of its own, no river access even. It existed for one purpose: housing the artisans who carved and painted the tombs of the pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. Roughly 60 to 120 men at any given time, depending on the decade and the scale of the current royal project, worked inside the most secretive and heavily guarded construction sites in the ancient world. Because their labor was considered essential to the afterlife of the king himself, the state had to keep them alive, healthy, and willing to keep showing up. That single fact changes everything about how the village worked, and it's the key to almost every strange benefit that follows. For most of human history, sickness meant lost income. If you couldn't work, you didn't eat. That was true in Rome, true across medieval Europe, true for most manual laborers well into the 20th century in large parts of the world. Deir el-Medina broke that rule roughly 3,000 years before it became common practice almost anywhere else. And it kept breaking it for close to 2 centuries straight, across multiple dynasties and multiple kings. The evidence isn't guesswork. It comes from thousands of small handwritten notes called ostraca, broken pottery shards and flakes of limestone used the way we'd use a sticky note or a spreadsheet cell today. Egyptologists, working largely from material excavated at the site over the last century, have recovered administrative logs that tracked, almost day by day, who showed up to the royal tomb and who didn't, and why. And the reasons are right there in the ink. Absent eye trouble, absent scorpion sting, absent brewing beer for a festival. One entry lists a worker out because his wife was menstruating, a household matter the crew's own supervisors apparently accepted as a legitimate excuse to stay home. Somebody wrote down a stonecutter's hangover, quite literally, as a documented reason for missing a shift, and it did not cost him a day's pay. Think about that for a second. This isn't a museum plaque summarizing ancient values in soft language. It's a supervisor's actual attendance sheet, 3,500 years old, and it reads almost exactly like a modern HR log, minus the euphemisms modern offices tend to use. But sick leave alone wouldn't have been enough to keep a workforce like this functioning. And that wasn't the real problem the village had to solve. The real problem was that these men were doing dangerous, repetitive, physically brutal work, cutting through solid limestone with copper chisels, inhaling fine stone dust for hours at a stretch, hauling blocks and rubble through narrow tunnels lit only by wick lamps burning salted oil to cut down on smoke. Injury wasn't rare. It was expected, almost routine. Eye damage shows up constantly in the surviving records, which isn't surprising for men working by open flame in enclosed rock chambers day after day for their entire working lives. So the village kept something that functioned like a staff physician. Medical texts recovered from the period, including sections of what's now called the Ebers Papyrus, a compilation of roughly 900 medical recipes and treatments dating to around 1550 BCE, the same era the village was founded, describe remedies for burns, eye infections, digestive illness, and open wounds. Organized almost like a reference manual, a working physician could actually consult on site rather than a purely ceremonial religious text. Deir el-Medina had at least one resident specialist, referred to in the surviving texts as a SWNW, whose job was to treat the crew, not the elite of the royal court. That detail matters more than it sounds. Medical care in the ancient world was almost always a privilege reserved for royalty, priests, and the wealthy. Here it was a job benefit, extended to men who cut stone for a living. Alongside that, the records show something that looks like informal peer support, coworkers listed as covering for one another's shifts during illness, which suggests these absences weren't just tolerated after the fact. They were planned around in advance, the way a modern team might arrange coverage before someone goes on leave. And then there was